She left 17 voicemails, sent 43 messages, wrote a handwritten letter and asked someone to deliver it straight to his office. All of it. Just to tell him one thing. She was pregnant, but he never answered. Not a single call, not a single message, not a single sign of care. That night, in the silence of a hospital room, she held her stomach as tears soaked the pillow. She whispered softly to the child not yet born, "Even if he doesn't want you, I will protect you to the very end." Outside, the world kept moving, loud, careless, and unkind, and she had no one, alone with her pain, her fear, and endless nights with nobody by her side. Have you ever felt that way? Carrying everything alone, simply because the one you loved most turned his back on you? If your heart has ever been broken, stay with us until the very end of this story. And don't forget to leave a comment, letting us know which city you're watching from, because sometimes even the smallest words shared can ease a hurting heart. A few weeks before Charleston, Richard Cole had stood alone in his Manhattan office, a cream-colored envelope in his hand. His sister Maggie's handwriting curved across the front, elegant and hopeful. "You are invited to the wedding of Margaret Cole and Daniel Carter." The card was small, delicate, but it pressed against his chest like a stone. He turned it over again and again, unable to put it down, unable to let it rest. 2 years. That was how long it had been since he signed the divorce papers. 2 years since Angela Brooks had walked out of his life, carrying with her the only warmth he had ever known. The paper trembled between his fingers, though his face stayed still. To anyone else, it was a celebration. To him, it was a reminder. Every elegant letter was a scar reopening, every word a quiet accusation. He had lost his wife. He had lost himself. The office around him shimmered with glass and steel, the skyline stretching endless. Yet he saw only that card. And in that moment, Richard understood something he had refused to admit. The past does not stay buried. It waits, patient, until the right letter forces it back to life. Richard laid the invitation on his desk and opened a drawer he never touched. Inside was a silver frame face down. He lifted it, his thumb sliding over the glass. Angela's laughter was frozen inside. Her head tilted back, her eyes crinkled with joy, a teal dress shimmering under the lights of a long-forgotten gala. That night should have been ordinary, yet she had turned it into something unforgettable. She always did. The room had glowed simply because she was in it, and he had stood beside her, silent. Not once had he told her what she meant to him. Not once had he said the 3 words she had needed to hear. "I love you." He had convinced himself she already knew, that the penthouse, the designer clothes, the limitless cards would prove his devotion. But money could not speak. Money could not hold her when she cried. Now the memory stabbed like glass. 2 years later, her smile still pierced the walls he had built around his life, and he saw clearly the truth he had buried. He had given her everything except himself, and in the silence he chose, he had lost the only woman who ever made him human. Richard Cole was a name etched into skyscrapers and stock markets. His empire stretched across continents. He was the man reporters called ruthless, the man competitors feared. His penthouse reached above the clouds, his cars gleamed in hidden garages, his evenings filled with glittering banquets where champagne flowed like rivers. But when the applause faded, he was alone. Alone with the echo of footsteps in marble halls. Alone with the cold hum of empty rooms. He had everything a man could buy, yet nothing that could warm a bed or a heart. Sometimes he wondered if this was what victory looked like, exhaustion disguised as power, loneliness dressed in tailored suits. His reflection in the glass tower windows was sharp, polished, untouchable. Yet, behind the steel-gray eyes lived a hollow ache, a silence he could not drown no matter how many deals he closed. People envied him, worshipped his name, whispered about his fortune. They never saw the cost. They never saw the man who ate dinner alone, who slept with no dreams, who woke only to work and repeat. Richard had built a fortress of wealth and reputation, but in protecting himself, he had locked away the one thing he craved most: love. The phone rang late one evening. Maggie's voice spilled through the line, warm, urgent, trembling just slightly. "Richard, promise me you'll come. It's my wedding. I need my brother there." He closed his eyes, leaning back against the leather chair. "You don't understand." "I do," she cut in softly. "I know it's complicated. I know she'll be there. But Angela is still family to me, to us, and I can't walk down that aisle without you waiting at the end." Her words hung heavy. Family. The one bond he had never been able to sever, no matter how cold he had become. Maggie had stood by him when his marriage fell apart. She had defended him when whispers of his failures circled their mother's dinner table. Now she was asking for the one thing he wanted to avoid most. "Richard," her voice broke, "I need you." He gripped the phone tighter, jaw clenched. For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Finally, he forced a breath. "I'll come." When he hung up, the room seemed smaller, the shadows darker. He had agreed. Soon he would see Angela again. Soon he would face the life he had thrown away, and nothing terrified him more. The jet cut through the night sky, leaving New York behind. Richard sat by the window, the city shrinking into a blur of lights. Below him stretched darkness, endless and heavy, but inside his mind, a brighter image burned. Angela. He remembered the way she used to leave their penthouse, quiet footsteps on marble floors, the soft click of the door. She never shouted, she never begged. She only slipped away, again and again, until one day she didn't return. Now, staring at the clouds beneath him, he felt the same emptiness he once dismissed. That penthouse, with its floor-to-ceiling glass and priceless art, had been nothing more than a cage. Angela had walked out of it carrying all the warmth he never gave her. The engines roared steady, yet his chest felt unsteady. He was flying toward Charleston, but it felt like he was flying back into his past. Every mile closed the distance between him and the truth he had avoided. Soon he would have to see her. Soon he would have to face the consequences of silence. Richard pressed a hand to the window as if the cold glass could steady him, but the glass, like his life, only reflected emptiness. By the time the plane touched down, the sky had turned golden. Charleston welcomed him with warm light, not the steel glare of Manhattan. Vineyards stretched under the sun, rolling hills scattered with magnolias and roses. The wedding site glowed with simple elegance. White chairs lined the grass, lanterns hung from oak branches, and laughter rippled through the air. Guests hugged long and spoke with open voices, not guarded tones. They looked at one another, not at their phones. Richard stepped onto the gravel path, shoes crunching softly. He had faced boardrooms full of men twice his power, but this openness, unnerved him more. These people did not measure worth in numbers or titles. Here, love was the currency. Here, belonging was given freely. He walked past tables draped in linen, the scent of bread and jasmine weaving together. It was everything Angela had once longed for: warmth, community, joy. He remembered brushing her off when she spoke of wanting family dinners, children running barefoot, nights under string lights. Now he stood among it, a stranger. His tailored suit felt heavy. His name meant nothing here. And in every smile around him he saw the life he had denied her, the life she had found without him. "Richard!" Maggie's voice carried across the vineyard, bright and unguarded. She ran toward him, her gown swishing like sunlight-made fabric. Before he could brace himself, she threw her arms around him, hugging as if she had been waiting her whole life. "You came," she whispered against his shoulder, her words full of relief. "I said I would," he answered, though his voice came out rougher than he intended. Maggie leaned back, studying him with the sharp honesty only a sister could wield. "You look terrible," she said, but her smile was tender. "That's good. At least it means you're human." He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. His gaze kept drifting, scanning the courtyard, the terrace, the clusters of laughing guests. Searching. Maggie noticed. She always noticed. "She's here," she said softly, slipping her hand through his arm. "Angela's been helping with the details. She's my maid of honor, Richard. You knew she would be." His stomach dropped, a weight heavier than the flight. He had known, but hearing it still pierced. "She looks different now," Maggie added, her tone gentle. "Stronger." Richard swallowed hard. He was glad for Maggie's arm, steadying him, because without it he wasn't sure his legs would hold. "Richard!" The voice of Lorraine Cole sliced through the hum of the vineyard. Their mother approached, silver hair immaculate, perfume trailing like memory. She kissed his cheek, then pulled back, her eyes sharp. "You look thin," she said. "Do you eat meals anymore, or do you only swallow coffee and protein bars?" Richard forced a smile. "I eat meals, Mother, with plates, with forks." Her gaze didn't soften. "You've been like a ghost these past 2 years, floating through offices, drifting through houses. Tell me, Richard, Are you still alive or just haunting your own life? The words cut deeper than he expected. Alive? He had been efficient, powerful, successful. But living? No. He had avoided life itself. He didn't answer. He couldn't. The silence between them said everything. His mother touched his arm, her voice lowering. Your father made the same mistake. Don't repeat it. For a moment the vineyard blurred around him. The laughter, the music, the lanterns, all distant. Her words echoed in his chest, filling the hollow space he tried to ignore. Alive or ghost? The choice had always been his, and soon, he knew, someone else would force him to confront it. The courtyard stirred as a bridesmaid spilled from the vineyard's main hall, their dresses catching the last of the sunlight. Laughter floated above the music. And then, there she was, Angela Brooks. She walked with the others, but she carried herself differently now. Shoulders straight, chin lifted, each step steady. Her sundress glowed sea-glass blue against her skin. A flower tucked in her dark hair caught the light. She didn't look like the woman who once cried quietly in his penthouse, swallowing her pain so he wouldn't have to face it. She looked radiant, confident, transformed. Richard's chest tightened. The Angela he remembered had whispered around him, waiting for scraps of affection. This, Angela, radiated her own. She laughed at something one bridesmaid said, and the sound hit him like it always had. Sharp, unforgettable. For an instant he thought she might look his way. His breath stopped, but she didn't. She only carried on, her smile reaching others, never him. And in that moment, Richard realized. The woman he had loved and lost had grown without him, and the distance between them was wider than 2 years. That evening, long tables stretched across the stone terrace, lit with strings of golden light. Guests clustered close, glasses clinking, voices weaving in warm harmony. Richard sat 3 tables away from her, far, but never far enough. Angela sat with the bridesmaids, wine glass in hand, her laughter carrying on the night air. She gestured as she told a story, the whole table leaning closer, drawn to her glow. He remembered that same energy when they had first met, how she lit up rooms that had always felt sterile to him. He had dimmed that light once. Now, free of him, it shone brighter than ever. He lifted his glass, pretending to sip, but really just watching. Every laugh reminded him of what he had lost. Every smile reminded him of what he had never given. Around him, conversations flowed easily, but Richard felt like a stone in the river. Still, cold, unmovable. Maggie passed by, leaned down, and whispered, "You're staring." "I'm observing," he muttered. She shook her head. "You're drowning." Richard didn't deny it. Because across the tables, in the glow of lantern light, sat the one woman he had loved, and the proof of how completely he had failed her. The night pressed on, music low, voices weaving soft around him. Richard felt the weight of every moment, every breath, and then her voice. "Hello, Richard." He turned. Angela stood just a step away, her glass empty, her expression calm but steady. 2 words. Simple. Yet they struck harder than any boardroom battle he had ever fought. "Angela," he managed, his throat dry. He rose halfway from his chair, unsure whether to shake her hand, to step closer, or to stay rooted. Instead, he stood awkwardly, towering yet fragile. "You look well," she said politely. "You too," he replied. The words felt hollow, useless, like crumbling paper. Silence stretched. Not the silence of comfort, but the kind that sliced thin, sharp. A silence filled with everything unsaid. Apologies never spoken, confessions never given. Her eyes flickered just for a second with something he couldn't read. Disappointment? Pity? She gave a small nod, turned, and slipped back toward her table. Richard sat down again, but his body remained tense, his pulse racing. That brief exchange had left him shaken, because if 2 words could wound this deeply, what would tomorrow bring? Back at the hotel, the vineyard light still haunted his window. Richard lay on the bed, tie loosened, shirt half open, but rest refused to come. He stared at the ceiling, shadows shifting across the plaster. Every moment replayed. Her laugh at the table, her voice saying his name, her eyes not quite meeting his. Tomorrow, she would be standing in front of him for hours. Tomorrow, she would walk down the aisle beside Maggie, radiant in daylight. Tomorrow, there would be no escaping her presence. He pressed his palms against his face. He had faced lawsuits, crises, collapses that cost billions. None of them had made him feel like this, helpless, unprepared, undone. The clock ticked toward dawn, each second heavier than the last. He closed his eyes, but instead of darkness he saw teal silk, silver laughter, a home he once had, and the silence he had chosen over love. By morning, his eyes were raw, his chest tight. He dressed in charcoal gray, knotting his tie with precision, armor for the day ahead. But inside, he already knew. No suit, no mask, no wealth could protect him from what was waiting at the vineyard. The sun broke clear and golden, Charleston alive with music and blossoms. The vineyard shimmered with white roses and flowing fabric, each detail perfect, each guest radiant with expectation. Richard arrived with his mask firmly in place, his jaw set, his suit flawless, his eyes cold. He stood like a marble statue among the living. No nerves, no warmth, at least on the surface. The ceremony space filled quickly, chairs arranged in neat rows, the string quartet tuned, notes floating like whispers of fate. Families greeted one another with embraces. Friends laughed, glasses clinked, promises of joy hung in the air. Richard stayed still, his hands clasped behind his back. He told himself he belonged here, a guest like any other. He told himself he could survive this day by remaining silent, distant, untouchable. But inside, his chest carried a storm. He felt every heartbeat like a countdown. He knew something waited, something that would strike without warning. He just didn't know when. The music swelled, soft but commanding. The bridal party gathered out of sight, preparing to step forward. Richard's gaze fixed on the aisle, his face cold. His heart knew better. Calm never lasts. The bridesmaids began to walk out, dresses flowing sea-glass blue. One by one, they moved with grace under the southern sun. Then came Angela. But she wasn't alone. In her arms, nestled against her chest, was a child. A boy no older than a year. He wore a tiny navy suit, his cheeks round, his dark hair catching the light. And then he turned. Richard froze. The boy's eyes. Storm gray. His eyes. Time stopped. The music blurred. The guests vanished. The vineyard fell away. There was only Angela, radiant and steady, holding a child who carried his blood in plain sight. The boy cooed softly, his gaze locking onto Richard's across the crowd. Recognition, innocence, truth. Richard's breath caught. His chest burned, his mind spun. He had not known. He had not been told. And yet, here was proof undeniable, staring back at him with the eyes of his lineage. Angela lifted her head, and their gazes met. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried a sadness so deep it cut through him. She shifted the boy gently and walked on. Richard stood rooted, cold no longer. His empire, his pride, his walls, shattered in one heartbeat. The vineyard hushed as Maggie stepped forward, radiant in ivory silk. Daniel faced her, his voice steady as he spoke his vows. Promises of love, of loyalty, of forever. The crowd leaned closer, their hearts caught in the sweetness of devotion. But Richard heard only echoes. The words floated past him like distant waves, never reaching shore. His eyes stayed fixed on Angela and on the child in her arms. Ethan. The name burned through him, though no one had spoken it aloud yet. He could see it in the way Angela soothed the boy, in the way she swayed with him gently, in the way every gesture said mother. The vows continued, but Richard's world tilted. He had not been there for the pregnancy, not for the birth, not for the first laugh, the first word, the first step. He had missed it all. Applause rose as Maggie finished her promise. Daniel slid a ring on her finger, his hands trembling with joy. The crowd smiled, teary and full. Richard did not clap. He sat frozen, his heart pounding with a different vow, one he had never made, one he now ached to speak, to the son he had never known. The minister's voice faded into a blur. Richard felt a different sound, a reel of memories unwinding inside him. Angela's missed calls, dozens, maybe more, her voice in voicemails he had never opened, soft, uncertain texts that had gone unanswered, and the letter. He remembered it now, a handwritten note slipped onto his desk, his assistant saying he was too busy to read it. He had tossed it aside, convinced it could wait. It had not waited. His fists clenched against his knees. Regret dug into him sharper than any business loss. Deals could be renegotiated. Stocks could recover. But this silence he had chosen, had stolen something he could never reclaim. He thought of her alone, carrying Ethan. He thought of her crying quietly into the night, while he buried himself in meetings and mergers. He thought of the life she had built without him, the strength she had gained because he refused to see her pain. For the first time in years, his chest ached with something raw, human, unbearable. Not pride, not ambition, pure regret. And still, the ceremony carried on, the vows spoken, the rings exchanged. Life moved forward. Only he remained locked in the prison of his choices. The guests rose as Maggie and Daniel kissed, applause swelling like thunder. Richard stood because everyone else did, but his gaze never left the boy. Ethan shifted in Angela's arms, restless. His small head turned, dark hair catching the light. And then his eyes found Richard. Storm gray met storm gray. For a moment, the vineyard disappeared. There was no wedding, no applause, no family. Only that gaze. Ethan's face was round, innocent, untouched by the weight of adult failures. Yet in those eyes, Richard saw recognition. Not of a man, not of a father, but of something deeper, home. The boy gurgled softly, reaching one tiny hand into the air as if to bridge the distance between them. Richard's breath caught. His knees nearly buckled. He had never held this child, never fed him, never rocked him to sleep. And still, in that fragile instant, Ethan reached for him. It was not accusation. It was not judgment. It was invitation. Richard's heart cracked open. All the money, all the towers, all the victories, none had ever given him this feeling. Warmth, belonging, a piece of himself reflected back without shame. For the first time in his life, Richard Cole understood what it meant to come home. The terrace glowed with string lights, music drifting into the warm night. Guests danced, glasses clinked, joy filling every corner of the vineyard. Richard stood apart, whiskey glass heavy in his hand. He barely sipped, his eyes fixed on one sight only. Angela. She moved with quiet grace, balancing Ethan on her hip as if he were weightless. She wiped crumbs from his cheek with a napkin, swayed him gently when he grew restless, whispered to him with patience only a mother could summon. Her laughter came softer now, but steadier, woven with strength. And Richard saw it. The truth he had ignored. The sacrifices she had carried alone. Sleepless nights, endless days. Decisions made without support, without him. He had been chasing empires, while she had been holding their world together with her bare hands. Ethan nestled closer to her shoulder, safe, content. The sight cut Richard open. For all his wealth, he had given nothing that mattered. Angela had given everything. Around him, the reception sparkled with celebration. But inside, Richard felt only one truth. He was watching a life that had grown without him, a life that should have been his to share. Later, away from the music, Richard finally stepped forward. Angela stood near the edge of the vineyard, Ethan drowsy in her arms. Lantern light brushed against her face, making her look almost untouchable. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice cracked before he could steady it. Angela turned slowly, her eyes steady, her arms tightening around Ethan. "I tried." Richard swallowed hard. "I never knew, because you never listened." Her voice cut clean. "Do you remember the calls you ignored? The messages? The letter I sent? You had time for everyone else, just not for me." Her words struck sharper than any blade. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "I would have stayed." "No." Angela shook her head, her tone quiet but firm. "You left long before I ever walked out. You left every time you chose silence over love, every time you thought money could speak for you." Ethan stirred, pressing his face against her shoulder. Angela rocked him gently, her voice softening. "You wanted distance, Richard. You got it, but don't ask why you weren't told. You never wanted to know." Her truth left him hollow. Left. For the first time in years, Richard had no defense. The silence between them weighed heavy, broken only by the soft rustle of leaves. Ethan shifted in Angela's arms, blinking sleepily. Then, with sudden clarity, a small sound escaped his lips. "Duh! Duh!" The world stilled. Angela froze, eyes wide, her body tightening as if bracing for the impact. Richard staggered back a step, the sound striking him like lightning. His son's voice, not practiced, not taught, just pure, innocent instinct. "Duh! Duh!" Ethan repeated, reaching one small hand toward Richard. Richard's throat closed. His chest cracked open. Every wall he had built shattered in an instant. This wasn't a business victory or a calculated move. This was love, raw and undeserved, given freely by a child who knew nothing of betrayal, nothing of pride. His eyes burned. He whispered, "Ethan," though he had never said the name aloud. Angela looked at him, sorrow in her gaze, but something else too, something almost like fear. Richard reached a trembling hand toward the boy. Ethan's tiny fingers curled in the air, searching, grasping. And in that fragile moment, Richard Cole, billionaire, untouchable, unshaken, finally broke, because nothing in his empire had ever sounded sweeter than one small voice calling him father. Angela's arms tightened around Ethan, her voice trembling yet fierce. 17 times, she said, eyes locked on Richard. I called you 17 times. I left 43 messages. I wrote a letter by hand and sent it to your office. Her words landed one by one, heavy as stones. Richard's lips parted, but no sound came. I begged you to hear me, to see me, to just pick up once. Her tone broke, then steadied. But you were too busy, too proud, too silent. He tried to breathe, but the air cut sharp. He saw it all now, his phone buzzing on glass tables, his assistant discarding notes, his own hand pressing decline again and again. Angela's eyes filled, but did not spill. You didn't lose us, Richard. You gave us away. Every unanswered call was your choice. Every silence was your decision. Richard bowed his head, throat thick with a grief too late. Numbers had always been his world. Now they condemned him, 1743, one letter, one child. He whispered, hoarse, I was wrong. But the words felt small against the weight of years. The lantern swayed softly above them, casting golden circles on the grass. Ethan stirred, restless in his mother's arms. His tiny fist opened, reaching outward. Richard moved closer without thought. His hand extended, trembling, and for the first time in his life he offered, not money, not power, not deals, but himself. Ethan's fingers brushed his, small, warm, alive. Then they closed around his father's hand, clutching tight with surprising strength. Richard gasped. It was as if the boy had anchored him to earth. For years, Richard had floated untouchable, disconnected from everything human. Now, a child's grip held him steady. His chest ached, not with pain, but with something raw and overwhelming. This was no contract to sign, no empire to rule. This was blood. This was belonging. Angela watched, silent, her expression unreadable. But Richard could not look away from Ethan. The boy gurgled softly, content, his fist wrapped firmly around his father's finger. And in that fragile touch, Richard felt the truth. For all his victories, he had never known triumph until now. For all his wealth, he had never known riches until this single moment of being chosen by his son. Later that evening, Angela led them into the manor's small library. The reception carried on outside, but here, shadows hushed the noise. She laid Ethan gently on a quilt spread across the sofa, humming low until his eyes fluttered closed. The boy sighed, his breaths evening out, the kind of peace only a mother could grant. Richard stood nearby, every movement cautious, as if one sound might shatter the fragile calm. He had walked through battlefields of finance without flinching, but now he was afraid to breathe too loud. His gaze settled on his son, tiny chest rising and falling, lips parted in dreams, a life untouched by greed, untouched by ambition, a life he had almost missed. The silence deepened, thick yet strangely full. Richard's throat tightened. His eyes burned. For the first time he allowed himself to truly see what Angela had carried alone, what he had ignored, what he had almost lost forever. He whispered into the stillness, more to himself than anyone else. My son. The words were small, cracked, almost broken. Yet in that silent room, they felt heavier than every deal he had ever signed. Ethan stirred in his sleep, a soft whimper escaping his lips, his tiny fists clenched, his body restless. Angela reached to soothe him, but Richard moved first. Let me, he whispered. She hesitated, then slowly placed the boy in his arms. The weight startled him, not heavy but profound. He cradled Ethan against his chest, awkward yet careful. The child fussed, little cries echoing against Richard's suit. Panic threatened, but then an old memory surfaced. His father, years ago, singing softly on sleepless nights, a tune woven into Richard's earliest days. Without thinking, he began. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. His voice cracked, uneven, but the melody carried. Ethan quieted. The cries faded. His wide gray eyes opened, fixing on Richard's face. The boy's lips curved, almost a smile. Then he sighed, settling deeper into his father's arms. Richard's chest broke open. He kept singing, tears blurring his vision, his voice trembling but steady enough for the child to hear. Angela watched from the sofa, her hand covering her mouth, and Richard Cole, the man who had once owned half the city, discovered the greatest power he would ever hold, being the sun that calmed his son's storm. Richard held Ethan tighter, the boy's soft breath against his chest. The song faded, leaving only silence. His eyes lifted to Angela's. For once, he didn't hide. "I want to be his father," Richard said, voice low but unshaken. "Not sometimes. Not when it's convenient. Every day. I'll be there, Angela. I swear it." Angela's arms folded, her shoulders tense. Her gaze lingered on Ethan, then on Richard. Hope flickered in her eyes, but it fought against years of disappointment. "You said vows before," she whispered, "and I stood beside you believing them. What makes this different?" Richard swallowed. "Because I finally understand what I lost, and what I almost lost again tonight. Money can't hold him. Power can't raise him. Only I can, and I won't run from that anymore." Angela looked away, brushing Ethan's hair with her hand. The boy sighed in his sleep, unaware of the storm surrounding him. When she met Richard's gaze again, her eyes were softer, but cautious. "If you mean it, prove it. Not in words, in days, in years." Richard nodded, his chest heavy but resolute. For the first time, his promise wasn't to a deal or an empire. It was to his son. Richard couldn't sleep that night. At dawn, he found himself walking empty Charleston streets until a neon diner sign pulled him in. The air smelled of coffee and bacon, the booths worn with years of stories. He sat at the counter, ordered nothing, and finally spoke. The waitress, a kind woman with tired eyes, poured coffee into his untouched cup. "I just found out I have a son," Richard said quietly, almost to himself. She paused, studying him. "Congratulations," she offered gently. His throat tightened. "He's nearly a year old. I wasn't there for any of it. Not the first word, not the first step. I didn't even know his name until yesterday." The woman rested a hand on the counter, steady. "Then be there now. That's all a child ever asks." Richard nodded, though tears stung his eyes. He wasn't confessing to a boardroom or a courtroom. He was confessing to a stranger, and somehow it felt like absolution. For once, the billionaire who had spoken only numbers spoke as a man stripped bare. He had no wealth here, no armor, just a truth. He had a son, and he could no longer live like he didn't. The diner bell chimed again. Angela entered, Ethan balanced on her hip. Her eyes caught Richard's, wary yet open. She slid into the booth across from him, setting Ethan beside her with a crayon and paper placemat. Richard hesitated, then leaned forward. "Can I help?" Angela nodded. He picked up a crayon, guiding Ethan's small hand as it scribbled uneven lines. The boy giggled, delighted with the crooked colors. Richard smiled, an unpracticed smile, but real. "That's good," he whispered, his hand steadying the boy's grip. Angela watched quietly. There was no grand gesture, no dramatic speech, just small acts, pouring juice into Ethan's cup, cutting his pancake into tiny bites, wiping syrup from his chin. Each task was ordinary, simple, yet each one felt monumental. Richard had built empires with sharper focus than this, but never had his heart raced like it did when Ethan leaned into him, trusting him with something so small. Angela's expression softened. She saw effort, not perfection. And in that booth beneath fluorescent lights, Richard began the slow work of becoming a father, not with promises, but with crayons, pancakes, and presents. For the first time, he belonged in their world. Snow had melted into spring. Central Park bloomed, the city alive with laughter. On the playground, Richard Cole sat in rolled-up sleeves, his suit jacket discarded on the bench. Sand clung to his hands, his shoes, even his hair. Ethan squealed with joy, digging into the sandbox. Richard knelt beside him, building clumsy towers that collapsed too soon. Each collapse only made the boy laugh louder, and Richard joined him, his laughter rich and unrestrained. Nearby, Angela watched from the path. She carried no bitterness now, only quiet pride. Her son had a father, not perfect, not polished, but present. Richard lifted Ethan high, the boy's laughter ringing across the park. In that moment, there were no boardrooms, no headlines, no empires, only father and son bound by joy. Angela smiled, a hand resting on her chest. For all they had lost, this was something worth keeping. A new kind of family, shaped not by vows or titles, but by love. Richard caught her gaze, nodded once, his eyes soft. She returned the nod. It was enough. In the heart of the city he once ruled with steel, Richard had found something greater. He had found home in the laughter of his child. Richard lifted Ethan once more, the boy's laughter echoing like sunlight breaking through clouds. For a man who once measured his worth in numbers and buildings, this sound was the first true measure of his life. He had chased fortune, he had worn power like armor, but none of it could compare to the weight of his son's small hands, the trust in those gray eyes, the word that had undone him completely, Dada. For years, Richard Cole had lived like a shadow, rich and empty. Now, in the heart of Central Park, covered in sand and joy, he finally stepped into the light. Money and fame can fill your name in the world, but only love can fill your heart, and the right to live fully begins not with wealth, but with the courage to hold someone close and never let go. Richard Cole was once a lonely billionaire. Today, he is simply a father, and that is his greatest fortune. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs hope, and follow this channel for more journeys of tears, of love, and of second chances that remind us all we are richest when we choose to love.